Influencers would be the channel right now that we see that's growing quite a lot. Influencers, I think, is one of the marketing channels that I think works really well. And it can vary a lot depending on the business. So I've seen some businesses and they do really well with direct mail. So literally posting letters to their to their customers.
E-commerce really is a dynamic playground for innovation and entrepreneurship. I was keen to get somebody on to talk about this space and the prospects for it to get disrupted by AI and other technology innovation. Aidan Corbett is a Dublin-based entrepreneur, e-commerce specialist and founder of e-commerce funding solutions provider Wayflyer. We go in deep on why it's a great idea for any entrepreneur to learn to code. We also talk about Dublin as a brilliant city to start a tech firm, how Aidan and his team assess and decide upon investment prospects and when to invest in entrepreneurs. We also talk about why VR and AR, augmented reality, still haven't really found a use case within retail and e-commerce and how Aidan sees that playing out. And we also talk about what makes a good e-commerce entrepreneur, what attributes does Aidan look for. It's a really great interview. Aidan is a top guy. We covered so much ground in a relatively shorter space of time than what we normally do, but it's as value-filled as any interview we've ever done. I think you'll love it. It's Aidan Corbett. Aidan, thank you so much for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast. How are you over there in sunny Dublin today?
Very good. It's a rare sunny day in Dublin. Delighted to have the late summer in September.
Yeah, it's a great city. Whereabouts in Dublin are you based, Aidan?
We're based right in the centre, and I live very close by. I love living in the middle of a city. I'm not a suburbs person, so even though we started a family recently, I adore being right in the middle of the city. And Dublin is small enough to be manageable, but big enough to be relevant. So it's a great place to live.
Absolutely. Well, it says a lot about me, but the part of Dublin I know best is Temple Bar, which kind of says a lot about the holidays that I've gone over on. Normally involved around rugby trips, but yeah, it's a great part of the city. It's a really up-and-coming, happening place right now, isn't it? There's loads going on. And I'd like to talk about that as well in due course. But let's start with this one, Aidan.
Sure.
We're a technology and leadership podcast. What does good leadership mean to you?
I think it depends on the person in question. One of the things that I've learned over the last 10 years of being in startups is that strengths matter more than a lack of weakness. So if you're really good at something, you should probably double and triple down on that, rather than worrying about bigging up your weaknesses more. And what that means is I think leadership can look very different depending on the person in question. So for example, Elon Musk is probably not the best person to lead Facebook, but he's definitely the best person to lead Tesla. And so your personality and where your strengths lie as a leader can vary from company to company. And I think leaders, to be most effective, need to lean into the things where they're great or they're world class, rather than worrying about where they need to improve necessarily. And what that means is that great leadership can look very different in different companies.
I agree with everything you've said there. I think context is everything, isn't it? And it's about being the best leader you can be within the context of the organization or whatever it is you're a leader of. You can be a leader in many ways, can't you? But yeah, that's a fantastic answer. Thanks for that, Aidan. So let's maybe go back to the beginning then. I want to just talk about the early milestones in your career which set you on this path. I understand you went to university down south in Cork. So on this period after you left university, what did you want to be when you grew up, Aidan?
If you look at my career history, it's very unclear that entrepreneurship was going to be part of it. So when I was completing my undergraduate, I think I ended up watching a lot of The West Wing in my final year of undergrad. Even though I did electrical engineering, I got obsessed with politics.
There's a lot worse things to do than that. That's a great show. But yeah, sorry, go on.
Absolutely. So I ended up spending a summer in Washington, D.C., doing an internship. And then I tried to actually get a job in the civil service here in Dublin. So I worked in the civil service for about 18 months. And in that time, I realized I actually didn't want to work in politics or in government. So I decided to do what everybody does when they don't know what they want to do. And I joined a management consultancy. So I worked in McKinsey for a while. And then I worked in a business that invested mostly in renewables called NTR. And then I did an MBA in London. And the MBA was really a method for me to get to the UK and get a qualification to see what I would do afterwards. And during the MBA, I got obsessed with entrepreneurship. And I stopped going to a lot of my lectures and basically spent most of the MBA learning how to code, which is not how a lot of my classmates spent it. And after the MBA, I bootstrapped my first business called Cubicle. And then after Cubicle, I started another business called Conjura, and Wayflyer, which is the business I'm running today, spun out of Conjura back in 2019. So a very varied first 10 years before deciding entrepreneurship was the thing.
Absolutely. So I want to go back then. You said you became obsessed with entrepreneurship. Can you, what was that trigger point? What was that watershed moment which really got you into? Were you inspired by a person, or was it just something that gradually crept up on you?
I think it was the fact that when you're doing an MBA, it's a very expensive way of taking time off, but it's a very socially acceptable way of taking time off. And when you have time off, you can really explore what gives you energy. And I remember at the beginning of the MBA, I kind of wondered, do we actually want to work in a private equity fund or a hedge fund or continue to do investing? And I remember almost living in the roles for 3 or 4 weeks. I would do the research, go online, read up about company financials. And then after 3 or 4 weeks, it was very beneficial because I realized that I would hate that job. And what I actually just got a lot more passionate about was entrepreneurship, because I was doing a course in entrepreneurship at the time. And it just appealed to me. And one of the things that appealed to me was the ability to kind of create a company that you would want to work in. MBAs, and I with a lot of employees, we all think that we know how to run the company we're working in better than the current leaders. There's a lot of freedom in creating the company and the structures and the values that you want to, in a company that you want to work in. So that was very appealing to me. And also, I fell in love with being able to create and being able to do it myself.
Yeah.
And I probably spent too long actually relearning how to code, but that did give me the freedom to come up with ideas and actually test them. And that was very empowering.
Sure.
But that ability to kind of live in the job for a while is really beneficial, because you can think you really want to be an accountant or a lawyer or what have you. If you live in the job for 4 to 6 weeks, you have a great sense then of whether you actually like it or not, because it always looks good when it's on a website or it's being described to you by a friend. When you actually live in the role, you figure out pretty quickly, do you get energy from it or not?
Yeah, for sure. There's loads to unpack there, Aidan, but I really want to ask you about an MBA, something that I know I've considered myself, and I've done an LBA, which is kind of a taster course for an MBA. Well, can you tell us, why did you do an MBA?
Is it worth it?
Is it that's stripping everything out? Yeah. Is an MBA worth it? Let's just roll with that.
So I think if you want to become an entrepreneur, you definitely should not do it. And the reason is very simple.
Okay.
If the MBA is going to cost you the bonds of, if it's a top tier MBA, it might cost you 100, 200,000.
Yeah.
You are much better off taking that money and putting it in to your startup, because that could sustain you for, multiple years. So you're much better off actually just starting your startup rather than doing an MBA. And you will learn way more in the first year of your startup than you will in 2 years of an MBA. What an MBA is really useful for is if you're not sure what you want to do, but you know you want to move careers, it's extremely beneficial because it creates a floor under which you can progress from. So for example, if you previously worked in finance and you want to become a product manager in Amazon, or if you were a lawyer and you want to become an investment banker, most of these organizations like Amazon and Google or Goldman Sachs or McKinsey or Bain, they all have specific programs geared towards people who have MBAs. So if you want to do a career change, MBAs are incredibly valuable because they create that floor under which you won't drop below. And they give you that kind of entry point into these organizations that you want to work at. But if you want to do a startup, you really shouldn't do an MBA because they're very expensive. You'll end up paying back that debt. So by the end of it, you're a lot less likely to actually pursue entrepreneurship. And at the same time, you've departed with a lot of hard-earned cash that could help you actually start the business in the first place.
That's fascinating. I think what I'm getting from what you've just said is an MBA is something to consider maybe later in your career if you want to go in a different direction, like you said. Whereas if it's your first gig as you want to become an entrepreneur and you've got a good idea, just do it. Just get it. Just done beats perfect, and just go and make loads of mistakes, and that's how you learn, I suppose.
Totally. If you think of time as the ultimate commodity, 2 years in an MBA with the additional amount of time needed to pay back whatever loans you have, that's an incredible opportunity cost in comparison to just starting your business.
Can I also ask you about you said you learned to code. You're not a technical person by trade. Looking at your, well, you did an electrical engineering degree. I understand that, but you obviously learned to code with more modern tech stack. Talk us through what prompted that, and what was your experience of learning to code like? How did you pick it up? Did you pick it up well, and did you love it, or was it a bit of a chore?
No, I pretty much loved it from day one. And I didn't do much programming, even though I did engineering in my undergraduate. And I did a bit of research online. And if I wanted to build a web application, this was back in 2013, so it's not too long ago. But if you wanted to build a web application back then, it was either Ruby on Rails or Python Django were kind of the two things that people wanted.
Or PHP.
PHP was beginning to become a bit uncool. So I ended up going with Ruby on Rails and pretty much dined out on Ruby on Rails for about 1.5 to 2 years. Probably limited me in terms of the types of applications that I could build. But ultimately, I just wanted to be in a situation where I could build something so that it could be tested. Because ultimately, you tend to end up rebuilding everything anyway, especially if you get a bit of product market fit. But I actually adored it. And that was one of the things that I think really sustained me through it, which was I was getting energy from coding. And I wouldn't be allowed to commit any code ever in Wayflyer. And that's a good thing for the business. But
yeah, sure.
I actually missed it a lot. And if I did have a bit of free time in the future and my kids are all grown up, I think I'd spend a lot of time programming because I get energy from it. I find it intellectually really enjoyable.
Do you think learning to code, like maybe if you're advising young people who are at the very beginning of their career, is it worth people coding these days? With all these no-code solutions and drag and drop to create applications, I mean, is it sort of, obviously we're going to need coders, but is it something which is going to contract? You know what I mean? Is there going to be less need for, full stack coders in the future?
I think data literacy is very important. So that ability to manipulate data, to understand it, SQL, maybe a little bit of Python, more from a data analyst, data science perspective, that should be more ubiquitous because whatever role you're in, if you have the ability to access a database, take data out, manipulate it, summarize it, do it in an automated way, write basic scripts, that makes you incredibly powerful versus somebody who can't do that. So that I think should be more table stakes than the ability to be able to write code. And one of the things as well is that if you're beginning to build applications from scratch, you're normally, if you call yourself a full stack coder, you're normally not very good at anything, but you're okay at everything. So you have a little bit of JavaScript, a little bit of Ruby, bit of SQL on the database side. You can spin up a server potentially. A lot of the time, to be able to do all of that, you're not a specialist in one area. But I think, and that's okay. I think the thing that's more important, more society-wide, is that ability to have those data literacy skills, the ability to maybe write a SQL script, maybe write a Python script, because more and more data today is not stored in Excel sheets, it's stored in databases, it's stored in APIs.
Yeah.
It's too big for Excel sheets. And in that scenario, you really have to have the ability to access that data and manipulate it. Otherwise, you may end up getting passed out by peers who can do that. And it's not that hard.
Yeah, sure. You talk to entrepreneurs on a regular basis, I'm sure, within the e-commerce world. Are most of them able to code then, Aidan? Do you come across any software entrepreneurs who are not able to code, or is it sort of an absolutely essential thing for them to know the code, know it at engineering level,
One of the co-founders will normally know how to code. But at the same time, I think that there's a ton of things to do at the beginning of a business that where a non-technical founder is needed. So I think you absolutely can have incredibly talented non-technical founders. Steve Jobs is probably the best example.
Yeah.
But at least one of the co-founders has to be able to code. I think it's very difficult to be able to iterate quickly if you outsource the programming. So iterating very quickly is the essence of the early stages. Much easier to do that if you have 2 or 3 coders in a room who are up all night, rather than sending product request specs to an outsourced agency. It gets expensive, and it's you just won't move as fast, and speed is everything in the early days.
Yeah, sure. So speaking of early days, I want to get back on track in terms of the chronological story of your career. You spent a year at McKinsey's. I know it was a while ago now. Well, it wasn't that long ago, but I think you nonetheless, I get the impression it was quite a profound period for you. I mean, what did you take? McKinsey's a renowned consultancy firm, written more books than you can count, and very, very impacted the business landscape, certainly in the Western world at least. What did you take from that experience And was there anything you took from it which has helped you in your career as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that you would take as good and some of the things you would take that I would probably regard as not so good. So the good things that I would take, the first thing is the work ethic. So McKinsey demand a serious work ethic, as do all management consultancies. And I came out of the civil service, so that was a bit of a sea change, as you can imagine.
What does your working day look like? Are we talking like north of 12 hours in a day, or? Yeah,
there might have been like a 6 or 8 week stretch where I wouldn't have gotten home before 10 p.m. apart from Fridays. But at the time, if you're 24, 25 and you're on a steep learning curve, you want to do that. So I think it gives you that great learning curve. And I think the other thing that McKinsey does is, and other consultancies do, is they really show you how to become a great communicator. If you think of what their output is a presentation and their output is a recommendation that's normally given verbally and in person. So a huge part of their skill set is actually the ability to communicate concisely and to also the ability to communicate with rigor. And they would have been the two things that I think McKinsey really benefited me. I was a much better writer. I was a much better communicator. I was a lot more concise when I left than when I went in. The one weakness I think that management consultancies have is because you have to do an enormous amount of work in a very compressed period of time, I don't think you go as deep as you should. So in my first year in McKinsey, I probably worked across 5 or 6 different industries. It's very hard to get up to speed and answer a very difficult problem in an industry that you don't have any context in, especially as a 24 or 25-year-old.
Yeah.
So I often feel that the answers probably could go deeper. And that's really what you have to do in a startup. Like, you need to know, if you're really going to do it well and give yourself the best chance of success, you need to know the problem space backwards. You need to know everything about it, every competitor, every piece. And that just gives you the best chance of success. You wouldn't have the freedom to do that as a management consultant because you need to move on to the next project in 6 weeks.
Yeah, sure. No, that makes total sense. So I believe you went on to be a business analyst for a while. And I think, was your first jaunt as an entrepreneur in terms of starting a company, was it Conjura?
It was Cubicle, actually. So Cubicle is it's a data literacy platform. And Cubicle is still going today. I'm still a shareholder and it's doing really well. We put a great new CEO in there called Mark Henderson a couple of years ago, and it's scaling really well. Very different to Wayflyer. So I have the experience of bootstrapping, which is Cubicle.
Yeah.
I had the experience of raising a small bit of money with Conjura, and I had the experience of raising a lot of money with Wayflyer. So I've tried all 3 different flavors of being a tech startup. But Cubicle was the first. And for the first year and a half, I was coding and recording videos that teach people Excel and other tools. And then gradually over time, we ended up getting our revenue up towards $1 million, being able to hire a team, brought in some external investors in 2020 when I ended up taking a bit of money off the table. But even since then, the business has gone on to scale really, really well. And unlike Wayflyer, Cubicle is very profitable and was bootstrapped and has raised a lot of money. So it's a very different business, but it was a really exciting thing to do. And it was very empowering to be able to build the first version of it myself, put it out into the world, iterate about 9 or 10 times before you eventually find some semblance of product market.
So why did a business analyst with a background working for a big consultancy firm start a training company then? How did that come about?
At the time in my MBA class, most of the class had okay Excel skills. Half the class, or the rest of the class, might have had amazing Excel skills. And most of the employers wanted people with amazing Excel skills. And if you were coming into the MBA without great Excel skills, it was a real challenge. And it was the thing that you probably struggled with the most. Yeah. I had very good Excel skills. So I saw a gap saying, I'm actually going to teach everybody Excel, but I'm going to teach them to a level that's like A+. Because most Excel training at the time would teach you with examples of 4 apples, 3 pears, 2 oranges. I was going to teach you an Excel level that means that at the end of like a 2 or 3 week period, you're going to be as good as a McKinsey consultant at Excel. That's what I was aiming for. So it was a very particular niche in the market, which was if you want to be amazing at Excel, you should take this training. So I never touched the mouse in any of the lessons. It was all just shortcuts. You're not allowed to use the mouse. And that really kind of set it apart from most of the other trainings. And it wasn't for everybody, but it was really for my initial target market, which was my classmates. And obviously, Cubicle has expanded a lot since then. It's teaching Python and AI and Tableau and Alteryx and lots of other types of tools. But day one, it was, if you want to be really good at Excel, I can do it in 2 or 3 weeks. And this is what you should use.
Yeah, well, I think Copilot's going to disrupt Excel and PowerPoint massively, isn't it? I don't know how much you know about that, but it seems to be, it's kind of like expertise on demand for across all the applications.
Fantastic.
But I can't wait to see it. I don't know if do you know much about Copilot? Have you come across it at all? Have you read about it?
So we use GitHub a lot internally, and I think AI is going to disrupt a lot of those tools, which is fantastic.
Yeah,
and I think that makes learning easier, will make everybody more productive.
100% agree. Let's come back to that because I want to get your thoughts on AI. But can I ask you about Conjura then?
Yep.
Let's maybe set the scene. Late 2016. You obviously, along with another co-founder or another two co-founders, was it?
Yep.
Come up with this idea, and it was all based around e-commerce. So what I'm getting at, Aidan, is what took you into the e-commerce direction? Because that's obviously where you've gone. So you've had this more general background and obviously training and stuff like that, but you obviously saw potential in the e-commerce space and you wanted to fire down that route. Can you talk us through that decision process and
Sure.
what brought that about?
So at the time in 2016, Cubicle was scaling reasonably slowly. I had brought in a co-founder into Cubicle, and he was definitely more on the sales side. We had a bit of an engineering team. And I had said to him, look, I don't think Cubicle is going to have this exponential curve rocket ship that, frankly, I was looking for, even though it was definitely going to be a very profitable bootstrapped business. I was probably wrong, by the way, but that was my thinking at the time. And so I teamed up with that co-founder. I let him take over running the business, and I set up a new company called Conjura. And we actually started off doing data consulting projects for lots of different types of companies as a way of actually finding a product. So our theory was, if we wandered into companies who had data problems, we could ultimately, 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6 times, we would actually find a product that we could build that could be scaled. A worst case scenario, you do the consulting project. And eventually we found an opportunity, which was creating a single source of data truth for e-commerce. And it was a segment where you had huge data challenges. It's very data heavy business. You had lots of different data sources. They all conflicted with each other. And if you were in a position to create a single source of truth of data for an e-commerce business, you were able to create a ton of value. And that was a product because they typically need to connect to all the same data sources. So they all need to connect to Google Analytics. They all need to connect to Facebook. They all need to connect to Google Ads. They all need to connect to Shopify. So you could do it in a way in which it became a product rather than it just being one single consulting project. So we did a consulting project for an e-commerce store, and then we actually decided to turn it into a product, which was Conjura.
Right, and it's just a one-stop. The platform basically covers analytics across all channels then, basically, yeah? Or all digital marketing channels, it's all there in one place, right? You got into the space 2016, 2017. A lot's changed since then from we've had COVID and stuff, but obviously from a technological advancements and innovation and stuff like that. But how was just to ask you a very general macro question here, what are the biggest changes in the e-commerce space between today and 2016? What's the most profound change that you've observed?
Customer acquisition has changed totally. I think back in 2016 to 2018, you could make really good money based off Facebook advertising and Google advertising. It's so much harder today. So back then, I think the cost to advertise, your ability to target, your level of competition, the amount of tracking that those tools could do before Apple started removing some of that tracking capability. Advertising on Facebook in particular and on social was much easier back then than it is today. And as a consequence, most of the companies that we back today, when we're looking to fund them at Wayflyer, we're trying to see what are the channels that they're using. Are they using channels outside of Facebook and Google Ads? And if they are using Facebook and Google Ads, how efficient are they with it? Because those channels have gotten a lot more challenging over time.
Yeah.
Partly due to greater competition, but then also partly due to the fact that Apple is constrained the amount of tracking that these companies can do, which relates to how effective your ads are going to be. So probably the biggest change that I can think of is definitely how hard it is to advertise. And that's in direct to consumer. If you factor in things like Amazon, I think the biggest change on Amazon since then has been the introduction of their advertising product. So when you look at advertising today on Amazon, might be the first 15 or 20 products might be advertised.
Yeah.
And you need to factor that into your own unit economics today if you're selling your product on Amazon, because it may bring you more deals, but it's certainly taking away a lot in terms of your cost base. So direct to consumer, it's been advertising on Facebook and Google Ads. on Amazon, it's been the introduction of ads and including that line item in your operating costs.
Yeah, sure. So what is the biggest mistake you see then that the retailers make, independent retailers and the kind of type of companies that you invest in, not the big boys, but what in terms of small retailers who are marketing products online, what's the biggest mistake you see them making?
So the first mistake is believing that having a great product is enough. The thing about e-commerce is it's very exciting because you're a global business from day one.
Yeah.
But that also means that it's really, really difficult. So building a great product is a necessary step, but it's nowhere near enough. So you need to know how to do marketing. You need to know what to do. You need to source a manufacturer. You need to figure out a way of partnering with a last mile provider who's not giving you great economics on every single parcel. You need to know how to process returns. You need to know how to interact with a 3PL. Now, a lot of those services today are better than they were back then. But the thing that we always say is that having a great product is necessary, but it's not enough. And you have all these other tasks to do. And all those other tasks are actually the majority of your time as a merchant, especially in the early days. And you need to enjoy all of that, or at best, you need to outsource all of that, or you need to get that done and not just fixate on perfecting the product. You also need to perfect all those other parts, particularly advertising and distribution, because that ultimately determines how successful you are. You can't go door to door with your product. It's hard these days, day one, to get in booths, for example. If you're selling direct to consumer, you've got to get your distribution right as early as possible, and building a great product is necessary, but it's not enough.
So in terms of like taking your offering global then, as you said, I know it's global from day one, but how easy is it for, let's just maybe focus on British and Irish firms trying to sell products. Would you advise your portfolio and entrepreneurs to just concentrate on domestic markets first before they go global? Or do you just put everything into a global strategy from day one?
Well, if you're based in Ireland, you definitely have to go global from day one because we only have about 4.5 million people. And that's too small. So if you're in Ireland, you definitely need to go global from day one. If you're in the UK or if you're in Germany or if you're in France, I think it really depends on how big the niche is. So if you're making very specific product for a very specific niche, you need to determine whether there's enough people in that niche in your geo. If you're like, do you know what? I think there's like 500,000 buyers for this product and that's more than enough in this geography, then that makes things easier. But if you don't determine that, then you need to go global from day one. And a lot of the companies that we see that do really well, they're in specific niches where you look at the company and you're like, how in the name of God did you come up with that product that's that specific? And they work really well. In that scenario, you need to go more global. So if you're a small market, go global. If your product is in a tiny niche, you need to go global. Other than that, you can stay in a domestic market.
Yeah, no, that's really good. That makes total sense. It's a logical way to look at it. But so how do you assess the potential of a prospective investment, Aidan? What criteria do you place emphasis on when you're looking at an investment opportunity, yourself and your colleagues?
It's very similar to what a VC would look at as an investor, actually. We just have the system set up to do it in a largely automated way. So what we like to see are really strong unit economics. So how effective are you at acquiring customers? Have you got multiple channels working, or are you reliant on a single channel? Has that channel been improving or disimproving over time? How sophisticated is your channel strategy in relation to that? So we can see when you connect up your data sources, how sophisticated are you as an investor on Facebook and Instagram?
Yeah.
The second thing we look at is, does your product have repeatability? Because if your product has repeatability, you don't need to be as good on the acquisition because you're getting a lot of follow-on transactions. So some particular verticals, you have a lot of repeat purchases. Health and beauty and baby products would be two examples. So if you're buying organic nappies online, you're going to keep buying them if you like the product. So that's going to have a very different set of unit economics and lifetime value than, for example, buying a toy or buying a mattress online, which tends to be a one-off purchase. So we focus on the unit economics, which is your cost to acquire a customer. We focus on that lifetime value, which is really a measure of repeatability. We also like to look at the range of products you have, because most e-commerce merchants will need to have a substantial range of products to get that lifetime value up. We look at your gross margin, because that will determine your profitability. So it could be really high at 80%, or it could be on the lower side at 50%. And then we look at your cost base. And the cost base is really around, how much does it cost to transport the product? How many staff do you have? What are your running costs? What are your storage costs? And we do that at a very granular level. And then in addition to that, we do a lot of the simple checks that you would do if you were a bank, around looking at your cash balance, looking at your accounts, etc. With e-commerce, because of the nature of the data sources, it just allows you to automate a lot of it, which is why the speed that we can turn around and the granularity that we can go into when we're doing our underwriting is greater than almost any other vertical I can think of.
Yeah. Well, what about the person then, Aidan? Do you have an investment criteria for entrepreneurs? Do you look for certain attributes, certain qualifications, even accreditations? Is there anything, or
no
red flags for you, things that you try to avoid in an entrepreneur?
So we will do the usual checks that you would do in an individual if they were applying for a loan or what have you, like adverse media checks and things like that. But no, we kind of let the data speak for itself. And normally with the company, when you look at the company information, the company data, you can get a really great handle on how well the business is being run. In certain scenarios, we will do a call, especially for the first time. We might do a call with the entrepreneur, particularly if we have some follow-up questions. We don't have a specific profile of person that we like to prioritize. Some of our biggest customers, we're taking millions and millions off us for years, are in their early 20s. So we don't have a profile that we kind of specialize in when we look at people. We just let the data really guide us.
Yeah. Well, what in terms of the flow of opportunities that you're seeing at the moment, how buoyant is the startup scene in Ireland right now? Are you getting bombarded with entrepreneurs wanting investment, or do you find it difficult to source good opportunities for yourselves? Or is it sort of somewhere in between?
Obviously, in Ireland, the e-commerce market is reasonably small because it's a small business. And Wayflyer, I think 65-70% of our business is in the US. So we don't really fixate on our Irish business right now. More generally, I think the startup scene in Ireland has been a bit later to the game than other countries in Europe. So I think countries like Estonia, Sweden, Israel as an example, kind of countries with a smaller population are probably ahead of Ireland in developing their own kind of set of unicorns. But I think Ireland is catching up. And Ireland has one major advantage, which is the sales talent that it's available in Dublin in particular. Most US tech companies, when they're coming to Europe, all their SMB sales that happen over the phone happen in Dublin, 1 square mile from where I'm based right now. So as you're scaling your sales function, Dublin is probably the best place in Europe to do it. So all the other functions like product, design, engineering, they're all really important. And Dublin wouldn't have the same resources there. But in sales, it's got one of the best sets of SMB sales resources in the world.
Why do you think, maybe in addition to what you've just said, why is Dublin a good place to start a company today for an entrepreneur?
It's a good place to live.
It's a good night out.
I think rent here it's a good night out, which is important if you're employing people in their early 20s, although it is expensive to rent here. I think it's a great place to do business. So it's very business friendly. It's English speaking, which helps if you want to expand into the UK and into the US. It's pretty good from a visa perspective. So you do have those advantages. It doesn't have a very strong angel or VC scene. I actually don't think that's as important post-COVID. I think one of the things that COVID did, particularly for entrepreneurs like myself who were not based in like London, Berlin, or Boston, or San Francisco, it removed a lot of those boundaries. So today when people are raising angel rounds, they may never meet the person. And I think angels and VCs today are much more inclined to invest in people outside of those major hubs. And that's helped spread the money around all over Europe and all over other continents.
Yeah. Where's the smart money going at the moment, Aidan? VC money, private equity, angel money? Is it, obviously I know AI companies are getting a lot of attention. Is there anything else maybe that's not so obvious, which is, there's a lot of interest in companies with certain products at the moment in the e-commerce space?
In the e-commerce space, I think there's always going to be opportunities in the e-commerce space. I think the easier e-commerce sectors to focus on are health and beauty and baby products for some of the reasons I mentioned earlier on. So number one, there's a lot of repeat purchases if you've got a great product. Number two, the margins tend to be pretty good. Number three, they tend to be reasonably easy to ship and cheap to ship. And number four, they're not very seasonal. So if you're a toy company, you might make only a handful of inventory orders a year, but you have to be really good at estimating how much inventory you're going to need for example, the Black Friday Christmas period. Whereas if you're selling, again, organic nappies or something like that, you're in a situation where you can make repeat orders every few weeks or every few months. And it's really not as big a deal if you get that wrong, because there's always going to be demand, because you need nappies, every week of the year. So baby products and health and beauty would be two that I would identify that actually tend to be, they would be a lot easier. And if I was going to set up an e-com brand tomorrow, it'd be in one of those two areas.
Really? Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Well, what about, can I just ask you in terms of marketing channels with the best value at the moment? You talked about paid advertising on certain channels being probably not as effective as it used to be. People talk about TikTok a lot, that it's a really good place to get new eyeballs on your product for exponential, your post can go viral quite easy. It's a bit more difficult to do that on Instagram these days. What do you think is the best value out there for a startup to get more direct consumer attention to their brand? What channel are you sort of most excited about at the moment?
Probably influencers. I think influencers are going to grow a lot. And especially when you're entering a market for the first time, influencers can be extremely effective if it's managed well and the ads are done really well. And it's the one that probably where you can get an amazing return if it executes well, because it's not done on a kind of a paid ads or a pay-per-click basis. So influencers would be the channel right now that we see that's growing quite a lot. And even though the influencers are posting on social media, it's a very different model to you having a paid ad on social media.
Yeah.
So right now, influencers, I think, is one of the marketing channels that I think works really well. And it can vary a lot depending on the business. So I've seen some businesses and they do really well with direct mail. So literally posting letters to their customers. And then other products don't work at all. So for example, if you're selling to ultra high net worths and they all live in big mansions, they actually check their post and they don't move around very much and they actually read their post. Whereas if you're advertising to people in their mid-20s and they're living in an apartment, they may not check their post that much, if they check it at all. And if they do see it and they realize it's not a bill, they're just going to throw it in the bin. It's not going to work. So you have to tailor the marketing channel definitely to the end audience. And one of the things that we've seen is the things that work are not necessarily always the most technically forward ones. So you might do an ad in the FT, and if you're selling a high-end product, that could work really well. But I wouldn't do that for the organic nappies, isn't it?
That's fascinating. It's different channels for different products, isn't it? Obviously, it's horses for courses. But what about technology then, Aidan? AI is everywhere at the moment. How is this going to affect or disrupt the e-commerce space, in your opinion?
I think it's actually very difficult to figure out. Most of the AI that I see right now that I think will be commercialized really effectively in the next couple of years is in the B2B space. And what I mean by that is, if you're a consumer, how is Shopify going to use AI to improve the user experience? How is Wayflyer going to use AI? How is that going to impact the unit economics? For me, a lot of the benefits of AI are going to be to companies that are B2B first, and then those companies will pass on the benefits to the customer. So, for example, Shopify, I think, have just released an AI kind of assistant to help you answer questions about your store if you're a merchant. So I think a lot of the benefits to consumers will take a while to actually flow through. I think the early benefits in AI are all going to be to businesses.
That's an interesting one, because that's my domain is B2B. But I think I get what you're saying. What about virtual reality, Aidan? Because there's a lot being said about augmented reality, especially in virtual reality, having an impact on the e-commerce space. I can't really think of how, apart from an experience in a store, for example. How have you seen that working for anyone at all, utilizing AR technology?
No, not yet.
No,
not yet.
What is the use case?
It's probably just another channel. So if you maybe the new Apple product that's coming out with their headset, where you would be able to trial something, but I haven't seen AR or VR succeed at all yet in e-com.
No, strange. I mean, I've read a lot of stuff about it, but no one actually using it. No actual tangible use case. Of people of companies improving sales through this technology. So I think it's still early days, though, isn't it? But fascinating nonetheless. Okay, so what technology innovation are you most excited about in the world right now, Aidan? It doesn't have to be e-commerce, just across the board.
Question. this will be vague enough, but I think there are a ton of repetitive tasks that AI is going to remove that will allow us all to do more interesting work.
Yeah.
So if you think of the phrase workflow, I think we'll all be in more flow because AI is going to take away a lot of the repetitive tasks, like sorting out our inbox and interacting with like legal forms or signatures or what have you. I'm looking forward to AI taking away all or as many of the kind of the menial tasks or the admin tasks that I do during the day, because I think that's where you're going to get a lot of benefits very quickly. You'll see some of the tools right now where they're automatically taking summarized notes of calls and circulating them afterwards. And I think that's only scratching the surface. If they can take away a lot of the admin that's involved around running a business, I'm going to be very excited about that. That's a very selfish view. It's what I think you can do in the short term.
No, I think it's you've just said what everyone is really thinking with AI. I mean, if I can come in on a Monday morning and I've got virtual assistant doing my job for me, and I can just literally direct my mental energy to the real tasks, like, you know, talking to customers and all the more complex stuff, I think that would be a great result, wouldn't it? You know, so yeah, exactly. I think that's a really good answer, actually. So looking back in your armchair now, Aidan, what career advice would you give to your 21-year-old self? What would you have done different? Or maybe what would you have not done different?
I'm not sure. I think definitely taking time out to figure out what gives you energy or what you really enjoy. I would have done that earlier in my career. So as I said, the MBA is a great way of doing it. Like the thought in my mid to late 20s of taking like 6 months out and doing nothing other than trying out different things. At the time, there was no way that was even a consideration. And as I said, the MBA was a very helpful way of, an expensive way of taking time out. I would definitely, earlier in my career or as early as possible, just take 3 to 6 months to figure out what is it that gives you energy and that you love to do, and that's something that doesn't feel like work. Because even if you're only starting from scratch in your mid-20s, you're going to be really good at it. Because what it feels like work to somebody else feels like play to you, and that's where you really excel. So try and find that out as early as possible. Absolutely.
And let's finish on this one then. Have you got a book, a story, a documentary, anything you've been inspired by in the last couple of years which have been having a profound impact on you? Any book recommendations or anything like that?
There's a great book on Elon Musk called Power Play, and it's just about Tesla. And that's probably, I know there's a new book coming out about him next week in the middle of September.
I sense you're a fan, Aidan, yeah? You're a fan of Elon, yeah?
I would say that I definitely could not even dream of doing what he can do.
Yeah.
And I think people who are not entrepreneurs don't appreciate what he's accomplished with SpaceX and Tesla and don't realize how hard it is. But if you read Power Play, you will definitely realize how hard it is.
I have not read that, and I am fascinated by him. So, do you own a Tesla?
I do not, but I will someday.
Well, look, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Gareth.
That was one of the shorter interviews we've done in a long time, but I think it's probably one of the most value-packed. E-commerce is such a fascinating space. Online consumer behavior is such a ever-evolving picture. Aidan is a very, very knowledgeable and charming chap. I really enjoyed chatting to him. There were so many things that stood out. I really don't know which one to sort of emphasize here, but I don't know if this is just a personal thing, but I was really fascinated on his view of doing an MBA. And I think he did make a really good point around the time in your career to do an MBA. I think absolutely get it. If you want to be an entrepreneur, then just set up a company and get it done. Done beats perfect. And it's the trial and error, the battle scars. That's what you really learn from. That's what really drills the lessons home. So I completely agree with that. But he did say there is massive value in an MBA if you are looking to change careers or maybe starting a business venture later in life. If you've been an employee in a company, in a profession or something, and you want to go down the entrepreneurial route, an MBA is a great investment in that respect. But an investment it is. It's a very expensive endeavor. So Aidan basically said, if you've got that money to pay for an MBA, just invest that in yourself and your startup as your seed capital to get going, which I thought was brilliant advice, and I think is definitely something I would agree with. So much to talk about that we had to cram into 45 minutes, but it was a really good conversation. It was brilliant insight on what he looks for, on what his company looks for in an entrepreneur, and what they assess startup opportunities against, and much, much more. Thank you so much for downloading. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you so much. If you found this episode valuable and thought-provoking, we would really appreciate it if you could quite simply click the subscribe button and possibly even leave a review. This helps us to spread the word and reach a wider audience so that we can make a bigger impact and bring you the best guests possible. Thank you so much for downloading.